You're about to see a conversation that I had with a former psychology student of mine named Jenny. And Jenny very courageously and very openly shares with us the struggle that she's been through with anxiety and with stress, and that it even got so bad when she was in college that she had a hard time breathing and went to the hospital. And she really vulnerably shares with us her own story and also a lot of the insight that she's gained about how it's okay to not be okay and how it's okay to get help. So I'm so grateful for Jenny joining us and having this conversation with me, and hopefully is of massive benefit for you as a community. And I also wanted to say at the front end here that if you're someone who's struggling with anxiety, there is help available. You're going to hear Jenny and I talk about a lot of options in this conversation. One of those options is therapy. You're also going to hear us mention my anxiety program. So that's a program that's entirely online for teens and college students. And it's basically me condensing my 20 years of being a psychologist for youth into this program. It's self paced, it's on demand. You don't have to have a conversation with people. That's not required. And it's intentionally designed that way because I know that can be a barrier for people getting help. So if you're interested in that program, look at the links in the description below. The first step is to have your parents view our free training where they're going to learn 3 keys to help you with anxiety. And they're also going to learn more about my program to see whether it's a good fit for you. You, of course, can also watch that training if you want to. As a student, you're completely welcome to. And in fact, that might be even better. But it's definitely designed for parents because they tend to be the people who enroll you in the program. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jenny. Jenny, welcome to the YouTube channel.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being with us. And I always start out these conversations just by saying a few things to remind people who are watching, who are joining us in our community. And forgive me for those of you who have heard me say this before, but just to be official and welcome everyone here, including Jenny. We'll get into this, but Jenny is not my therapy client, although I am a psychologist and I have been doing therapy with young people for about 20 years now with teens and college students. Jenny is not my therapy client. This is not a therapy conversation. This is just a conversation between the two of us as people. So, Jenny, how do we know each other? How did we meet?
Well, how did we meet? That's a story. Well, I was the first class I had with you. We met at college when I started my sophomore year, I believe. I was taking child psychology with you. And so I really enjoyed that class. I feel like that was the first class that I was able to connect with. Um, and I enjoyed my psych classes throughout college, but that one in particular, I felt like, okay, I'm not so much learning as much as I'm like, oh my God, this is for me. I'm thinking about it like when I was a child, how did that apply? So that was the first time that we were able to sit through that, walking through our own child development. I felt like that was very helpful and applicable. And I enjoyed it. And I stuck to you like gum at the bottom of your shoe, if I could tell the story that way. Because then I was your TA.
Yeah, well, my way of telling that story is that you were my student in my psychology classes, and then I invited you to be my teaching assistant for approximately like 28 semesters. That's kind of how my summary
That's
is.
what it was, and I would have been down for 29th, so we were good. We were doing okay.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad that we've kept in touch
Me
since
too.
those times.
Me too.
Um, Tell the people, what are you up to these days? Are you in school? Are you working? What are you up
Yeah,
to?
so, now I work at an office as an admin assistant, and I have been in school again. I started my master's program back in August, so I've been in the program for almost a year. I wanna say almost a year. Um, Out of college for 5 years now. and I just really enjoy what I do. I enjoyed what I studied, and yeah.
Yeah. I think you are an administrative genius. I alluded to that a little bit before I hit record, but I experienced that when you were my teaching assistant. So I know that the folks you are working with now are very fortunate to have you on their team. And I'm also very excited for your graduate studies. I've always been maybe a fan is a fair way of saying, like, I've always wanted you to continue with your education. So, what are you studying in grad school these days?
So now I'm studying leadership, organizational leadership. I'm sorry. And so you kind of get you weave. I'm studying at Vanguard, and so I'm excited about that because you get to weave in your faith and what you're studying together. And so just having the opportunity to do that and looking at leadership through the lens of my faith has been super helpful and super eye opening. I don't know necessarily what the next step is for me, but I'm just happy to be preparing for that. And you've always been a champion for that of, pushing me to be in school and stay in school and all that. So I appreciate that. And that has definitely been a motivating factor. But yeah, I just really love school. So
Well, I'm very happy to be your champion and your cheerleader, and we'll keep cheering you on regardless. So, before we hit record, we were chatting about, what topic might we want to talk about related to mental health. And you suggested what I think is a really powerful conversation about the stigma around seeking help for mental health. And yeah, I guess like that's such a powerful topic. What inspired you to kind of pick that as a topic? Why did that come to mind?
yeah, so well, first of all, I think it's really great that there's this program that you put together to help college and teen students who are looking for help for mental health help. But what brought about that particular topic was I want to say my own experience. I majored in psychology in my undergraduate studies, and I've always been curious about the way that the individual brain works. Like, I love people. And so that's why I chose to study that. But seeking help was a big deal to me because when I went into psychology, I had a very different understanding of what mental health help was. And so, if I can be totally honest with you, anxiety and depression in my culture or my community was non existent, in that you had anxiety, okay, sleep it off. You had depression, maybe it's not depression, maybe you're just lazy. And that's me being honest with you. And again, um, it came to a point where I thought mental health was applicable everywhere else. But if I'm studying this, maybe I should have the answers to my own questions. Like, you shouldn't be struggling with anxiety then. So there's a part of it that was like, okay, well, you should know the answer to it. And there's another part of it of feeling like if I struggled with anxiety, it was almost invalid. Or if I struggled with depression, there was like a lack of validity, if that makes sense, until I came to a place where there was so much happening and there needed to come a time where it was my turn to look for the help that I needed. And that made a complete difference in my life, and I'm all for therapy and looking for help now, but it was definitely a a struggle getting to a place where I can say, okay, I need the help for myself. Um, so I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many pieces there that I want to ask follow-up questions about. One of the pieces I heard is that in terms of this stigma around seeking help,
Yeah.
you mentioned your culture, and I know your cultural background, but having known you for many years, but for people who don't know you and who are watching this, can you explain a little bit about your own cultural background and then how that influences the way that people might talk about mental health or not
Sure.
talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm Hispanic. I grew up in both my parents are Hispanic, and I go to church, so my church is Hispanic. And I think that I learned rather quickly in college that there's a particular mentality around mental health and the Hispanic community. So I had the chance to talk to friends and family, um, not only when I looked for help, but also recently of what the stigma is behind that. Because in if I'm honest with you, I didn't really hear those terms until I got older. Mental health and looking for a psychologist or a counselor or a therapist or anything like that. And so, if I'm honest with you, talking about mental health in the Hispanic culture is kind of like a taboo, or it's kind of like we don't really believe in that, or and I was curious about that again as I got older because I didn't understand, and so there was as I again like I had a chance to um, talk to a few of my friends or family, and I actually did. Now that I'm remembering, I actually did a paper on this for my master's program on the stigma behind Hispanic Hispanics and help seeking behavior is what it was. And one of the primary things that was brought about is that our Hispanic culture is very family oriented, and acknowledging that you or your child or a relative is struggling with something like again anxiety or depression or something else that has to do with mental health, it's it's almost falls on somebody else like a failure of, well, we didn't do enough to make sure you were okay. Or you saying that there's something wrong is like a is showing our family as a failure because we're not enough. We did something wrong. We didn't raise you the right way. And beyond that, well, if I send you to get help, then whoever you're sharing with is going to know that our family's messed up and we screwed you up. Like, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a very again, it's a beautiful part of our culture how family oriented we are when it comes to this. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily applicable to everyone or across the board, but there's again a sense of we've failed you as parents, we've failed you as family if you're dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with depression. Um, and so in that sense, that's where I feel like culture plays a big role in seeking mental health help. The responsibility doesn't fall necessarily on the person looking for help, but it also falls on the family as like a blame shift. So it's not, yes, you're the one dealing with anxiety, but it falls back on me. What did I do? How did we mess up? So that's, I feel like, one big way that culture plays a role in looking for mental health help or the desire to look for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And for your own cultural background, being Hispanic, it seems like having such a family oriented culture is really a strength and is so beautiful,
Yeah.
like you said. And then the flip side of that is that if someone seeks out mental health help or if someone is really struggling with anxiety or depression, it's seen as an indictment on the family.
Yeah. So it's like a family, um, I don't want to call it a family problem, but it's almost, I feel like we take it on to ourselves. Like, oh, you're dealing with anxiety? Then it's almost like, well, we'll keep that under the covers or we'll figure out how to solve it ourselves. Because we don't want it to get out. Does that make sense?
Like, you don't like they wouldn't want it to get out to other people outside the family.
Other people outside the family, or I think it really boils down to admitting that there's a something that we need help for. Does that make sense? So it's more of like, no, you're okay. Like our family's okay. We're good. You don't deal with anxiety. You're not depressed. have we given you something to be depressed about? Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so it's almost like there's a personal responsibility of, if you're dealing with this, that means us as a family, there's something dysfunctional. And the reality of it is I think if we could all raise our hands, our families are all dysfunctional one way or another. Like that's just that's just the reality. We're not perfect. And that doesn't speak to saying like, oh, because your family's dysfunctional, you're gonna need help. No, it's just that I think that it's I can't rave enough about how helpful therapy can be and how helpful therapy is. Um, because again, in terms of my own story, um, I'll speak from that cultural aspect for myself and from the religious aspect, if that's okay too.
Mhm.
Because, like I mentioned, do I went to a Christian university for my undergraduate, and I'm finishing my master's program there as well. So I grew up as a believer. And so I'll be the first to admit that even in the faith community, seeking help can look different in different environments. And so you have faith communities that do encourage getting professional help. But there's also faith communities or people that don't in that religious area in the religious community that don't believe in necessarily getting help. And the people who can identify with that, whatever your faith is. For me, I can tell you that the option was given of, oh, well, if you deal with anxiety, well, maybe you should pray more. Maybe you should read your Bible more. It was not necessarily the first resort was to go get some level of professional help because that meant you were deep in it. Like there was something. And so it was, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, it was almost like, oh, don't talk. What do you mean you need to go see a therapist? Like, how bad is it? Um, and that's another thing that I'll flag there is that you don't need to wait for something bad for you to look for therapy. You don't need to feel extreme levels of stress, anxiety, or wait for a ball to drop for you to feel like, oh, maybe I do need therapy. No, therapy's good even when everything around you feels good. Like it's a good space to be at. Um, but like I mentioned about my own story, sorry to circle back like that, but
Please do.
um, it like I said in the cultural environment and also in the religious environment, there was a lot of I feel like, oh, if you just don't talk about anxiety doesn't exist. It's something that comes and goes. Depression, you're probably just laying around all day. Go outside and do something. Um, and so I kept a lot of the anxiety in as a child. I didn't know to identify it as that back then. But I dealt with anxiety from a really young age. And that primarily came through uh, my feeling like how I identify it and remember it now is I had a really hard time breathing in stressful situations. And so I didn't think anything of it then, but going into college, I had some experiences that initially, like I said, which is crazy because I chose to study psychology and always thought I couldn't apply it to myself because you should know better. But I had some experiences in college where I felt that overwhelming sense of not being able to breathe, or I go into a free state of not doing anything at all because I just feel so overwhelmed with my thoughts or what's going on around me. And so there was a particular night that I was traveling back between home and college, and I couldn't breathe. Like I couldn't bring myself to a full breath to the point where I felt like I was suffocating. And so I thought it was a physical problem that I was having, but my parents rushed me to the hospital. We went to the emergency room pretty late that night, and they ran all sorts of tests that day. And we were sitting in not the waiting room, but in one of the back rooms after they've admitted you. And so the doctor pulled the curtain back, and he told me that I was okay, but that he believed that I was dealing with high levels of stress and anxiety. So he sent me home with an inhaler. And for me, that felt so embarrassing in that moment because I just didn't feel like myself. And for him to say, "Oh, well, you just have anxiety, take this inhaler and you'll be able to feel like you can breathe again." I didn't register in my mind, like, what does it mean you have anxiety? Like, and it leads you to not be able to breathe. It just didn't connect to me. Like, it wasn't acceptable. You can't feel this way, have us rush to the hospital. Like, this is not an acceptable reason to be feeling for us to make this trip out here. And
Mm,
for the result to be like, you're anxious. Like, what is it, Um, and it wasn't even about like taking stuff off your plate or there was too much on my plate. That no, it was something I dealt with that I didn't know until um that moment. And even then, I feel like I dealt with denial in that I don't need that. It's not he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll be back probably because you didn't get what is actually wrong with me. But
see you in a week.
I'll see you in a week.
Doc
I don't
doctor.
I know. Thanks, doctor. Can I see an actual doctor? No, it was him.
Oh,
He was on the money. Um, and I wish I could thank him now. I don't know who he is, obviously, but
well, if you're watching, thank you for taking care of Jenny.
um, but that just opened my eyes to even considering, like, do you know that you deal with this? Like, what does that even look like for you? Um, so if I'm completely honest with you, because again, I thought if there was something going on with me, well, first of all, I have my beliefs. I could just pray. Maybe I'm not reading my Bible enough. Maybe that's what's making me so stressed out. I'm not connected, and it could be that, or it could just be again that I'm just being really dramatic, and it's not true what you're feeling or any of that. And so I put that inhaler at the very, very, very bottom of my bag, and I didn't touch it for a few weeks despite not being able feeling like I couldn't breathe. And a few weeks after having gone to that appointment, again, like I said, I didn't use it because I didn't think I needed it. I thought the doctor was like, he didn't do his job right and just wanted to send me home.
Doctors, am I right?
They only spend years studying for this stuff. Uh, um, and so to make this long story short, because it's long already, um, a few weeks after having gone to that appointment, I was sitting in my dorm room, and it was like one moment to another, I felt like I couldn't breathe. And it was late already. I didn't know what to do. So I just knew I was aware of the fact that I couldn't breathe. And I was telling myself, like, you don't need the inhaler. It's fine. You'll get over it. You'll be fine. But again, it came to the point where I couldn't take a full breath. And so fine, I grabbed the inhaler out of my bag and I left my dorm room, and I went outside and I just sat on the ground and finally used that for the first time. But I remember feeling like so low and so like blank at that point of I don't know what's happening. I feel I'm not in physical pain, but I'm not okay. And I don't know how to describe it to anybody because I'm not sick with a fever or with a cough, or there's nothing physically wrong to prove that I'm not okay. I don't feel well. I don't know how to explain the help that I need. And again, there was a part of me that was in denial, if I'm honest with you, because we don't deal with anxiety. We don't deal with depression. It doesn't happen here. Um, and so uh, that was one of the lowest moments where I felt like I felt lost. I didn't know what to do, but it was the first time that it hit me that I deal with anxiety and I need to look for help.
Mm,
And even the simple acknowledgement of of that for myself was a big deal, in that it was like, okay, now you know, what are you gonna do about it? How are you gonna There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you, but let's get you the help that you need. And so that's that's my story, as far as that goes. Um, and even then, knowing then and there, like, okay, you struggle with anxiety. For a while, I kept that to myself, because again, like I told you, I think what played into it a lot was, well, you're taking psychology classes. You can figure your classes will have the answer. You don't need to tell anybody that you deal with what you deal with, and it affects you the way that it does. So I thought, maybe if I stay in this program long enough, it'll help me first, and then I'll be able to help other people. But don't tell anybody about what you're going through. Um, so that only works for so long. That only works for so long, but um, that's my part of the story in initially experiencing, um, particularly anxiety. So
Wow. I think there's probably so many students listening to you talk about that who could relate to that, um, in like multiple different dimensions of what you just shared with us. And one thing I'll say from like the psychology perspective, this is my former like psychology professor hat, but I had a teacher who said information is not transformation.
yeah,
And so there's a difference, right, between learning all this psychology information, which is cool. I'm a fan.
yeah,
I've taught it. I still teach it. But
yeah,
there's a difference between between knowing the information versus like applying it to ourselves for our own healing, for our transformation, and taking action in that way.
yeah,
Right. So I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that to lift some of the shame, and I really like, I think it's Henry Nouwen, but he has an entire book called The Wounded Healer. And, instead of like invalidating that we can struggle as humans just because we're humans, regardless of what we study, I really think it's a beautiful notion that he has in that book of like, all of us are wounded. And in fact, the cracks, the woundedness is how the light gets in. Right.
yeah.
Um,
And
and I,
can I
go
add something
ahead.
to that?
Yeah.
I just think that looking back, I like how you said, there needs to be shame taken off looking for help, because we're people, we're human, and the idea of being perfect or not having problems is a little more scary than the thought of looking for help for something. Like, that just means you're human. Living a life without problems or anything of that sort is just, it's not real. And I
It's an
think
illusion, right? Like it would be dishonest. It would be an illusion. Yeah, it's not reality for anyone.
we just have so much access. We have access to so much now. And like, that's social media or ways of communicating or studying or what, we can do anything. And that's such a beautiful gift to have now. Um, but it can also kind of be a weapon, in that, for example, I love social media, so I'm definitely not bashing on it because I think it's a great way of communicating. But the fact that most of our social media platforms show highlights, I think that can really mess with your mental health if you're not careful. Like, our lives are not highlight reels. We go through things and we just show the pretty parts of our lives on social media. That's what we want people to see. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think transforming that into your reality of, well, if my life doesn't look like this, then it's not cool. Like, it's just not real. And so if there's somebody out there that lives that life, I mean, that's great. But I think the reality of it is it's just, we go through things. We're human, we're people. There are situations in life that happen. And even like I said earlier, even if there's not a situation that happens, you don't need to wait for something to happen to take care of your mental health. So anyway, I just thought that
Yeah.
was probably something good to know.
It's a really powerful encouragement. Um, one, that our lives are not highlight reels. Our lives are not flashy filtered snippets of curated perfection, right? If anything, I would say the majority of our human lives are mundane.
Yeah.
And we kind of miss the beauty of that on a lot of social media platforms,
Yeah.
right? And it's a really powerful encouragement to remind all of us that you don't have to wait for your entire life to fall apart or be in a massive crisis before you seek help.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Again, for me, if I could go back and tell myself like it's okay to feel what you're feeling, it's okay to ask for help. I think I wish I would be able to encourage myself to do that back then because it would have saved me a lot of pain, a lot of situations that I didn't know how to cope with. It would give me the tools to be able to learn how to walk through those things instead of continue to suffer for it because I didn't want to get help. Um, and part of it, I'll even admit, like for myself, I'll throw the stone at myself. Part of it could have been pride of I'm good. Like I'm not gonna get help. I'm not gonna be that girl. I'm just not. I'm just gonna not. I don't want to do it. How are you gonna be telling people that you want to be a therapist, but you're in therapy? Like that just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense in my head. As I don't know if that sounds crazy or not, but there was a sense of pride in me. I think that said, you know, you're studying for this. You should help yourself figure it out. And so again, there's that independent side of if there's a problem, you fix it. Don't make it anybody else's problem. Do it for you. You learn how to work with it. So I think again, just if there's college students out there that or young students or even beyond that, um, it's okay to get help and acknowledge that again, I just they're good tools that therapy has to offer. And so there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I really appreciate your honesty. Like, I feel like you're being so honest with us in this conversation. And pride, I mean, that's a difficult word. Um, I don't want you throwing any stones at yourself, by the way. That sounds painful. But I do think pride and shame are sort of two sides of the same coin, which is
Yeah,
probably our ego. And we all have that, right? We all have that. And that's why if I'm carrying something heavy and I'm walking down the street and someone asks if they can help me, I really have to catch myself before I say no, right? Like it's my pride is so immediate. And shame is the flip side of pride. It makes us want to hide, right? And be like this mask of like, no, I've got it all together and I don't need help and I'm okay.
yeah,
And the denial piece is like, I want to be okay and other people want me to be okay. So I'm just going to tell myself and other people that I'm okay.
right.
Um, and I ask you, like, going back to that story about getting the inhaler when you were in the hospital, this relates to like shame as well, because you're sharing that story with us today. And you mentioned you were so embarrassed to like actually use the inhaler.
Yeah.
How did you go from being that embarrassed years ago to now today where you're like openly, publicly sharing that story? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So, looking back at that story, even when, even that night when I did use the inhaler for the first time, um, I remember putting it in my sleeve, in the sleeve of my sweater, and like putting it up towards my mouth and doing it really fast in case anybody was walking by, which sounds so silly, right? Um, and I didn't want people to know. And that was, like I'd mentioned, my sophomore year of college, and I used it throughout the rest of my time in college because it helped. I wouldn't admit that to anybody back then. And like I'd mentioned, there was a very big part of me that was still in denial of me actually needing to go look for help. And so I kept that under the rug for a really long time, you know, that anxiety that I was dealing with, apart from other things that were going on. in my life. And so it's true when people say, like, you let things bottle up long enough, it's going to explode. And so there came a point where I had bottled up what I was feeling inside, what I was dealing with, where it did explode. And I lost track of, it felt like I lost myself. I didn't know it was happening, but I'm so thankful for the people that I had around me who encouraged me to actually look for help in the most loving way. And I consider that a gift, um, because I know it's not necessarily always like that. And I didn't have that initial experience, like I mentioned to you. That wasn't the kind of culture or embrace that I was familiar with when it came to therapy. Of, let's find you a place to get help so that you can feel better for you. Um, but like I said, thankfully I had a loving. I was surrounded by lots of loving people that sat me down one day and said, you know what, we care about you, we love you, and because of that, we're going to help you get help. And so I actually started going to therapy, which initially, again, I didn't tell anybody about until recently, because it was something that I'm telling you that I dealt with, feeling ashamed or embarrassed of saying that I admitting that I was in therapy, or I had to go to counseling, or there were things in my life that happened. It's scary to be vulnerable sometimes when our reality is not pretty. And so um even my first therapy session wasn't really that much of a therapy session for me, more because I just sat there and I didn't want to tell her, I didn't want to talk to her. Like, I felt like, oh God, I can't tell her my life. I, there was just a weird feeling for me, because again, it's years of dealing with, like, hiding your story or being ashamed. And again, going back to that pride, like we were talking about initially, there was so much of, like, oh my God, I can just fix this myself. I should have just, like, played it off, been fine, and I didn't need to come here today. So there was a lot of fighting with myself in that aspect of, you really don't need to be here. You can take care of it yourself. Even coming to the point that I came to, which, like I said, everything exploded. And so it took a few months for it to feel like it picked up momentum for me. So my therapist, I will sing praises about her for the rest of my days, because she was so patient with me. And I know that's your job, right? But she was just so kind. And so even in those sessions where I didn't feel like talking so much, she just knew what to say, or she just knew when to prompt, like, a silence, and let us sit in that silence if that's what we needed to do. Or if there was something that, that she felt or I felt that we could start a conversation on, we did that too. But going through that process just made me realize, I feel like it opened my eyes to the fact that therapy is a beautiful thing. And like I said, and I keep repeating, there's nothing wrong with looking for help. There's nothing, even if there's not a diagnosis, if you want to call it, or you don't know if you deal with anxiety, or if you don't deal with another kind of mental health situation. Uh, Recognizing that this is a part of my story, and I'm not embarrassed to share it, because I'm not the only one dealing with that. And I'm aware of that now. And if it can help somebody else, then by all means, here's my story, use it. Like, if there's somebody in college now that somehow comes across this and they're debating if looking for help, it's reasonable or not, or I don't want to do it, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, or you've experienced that, Hispanic culture of, we don't talk about mental health. No, it's totally okay. The door's wide open. And it's so much brighter being on the other side. And it's funny because shame is a weight, guilt is a weight, pride is a weight. And it so much lighter when you take it off and you're able to be vulnerable and open about your process, about where you've been. And again, it's not something to be pointed down to. Like, we're shaped by different things, right? In life, different things shape us. And I think that just being honest where we are as people, and that just helps us. It just is who we are. And so again, for a long time, I think it's significant for me now, because I hid for such a long time. It's in hiding for such a long time or keeping things to yourself. You learn how to paint a pretty picture. You know how to, put a smile on your face when you need to put a smile, or keep it together when you need to keep it together. Um, but it's just not realistic. And it's okay that it's not realistic. It's just not real life. So it's doing a disservice to, I think, ultimately ourselves, and to the people around you, because you just don't know how it'll help. You don't know that other people are dealing with what you're dealing with, because you don't share. So anyway, I'm thankful that now it's still a work in progress, and I think I've shared this story with, I could probably count the number of people I've actually shared that story with. Um, but it just has made me realize more and more often that, man, a lot of people do deal with things that we just don't talk about, because you don't talk about those things. And so it's totally okay, because we're 100% human, and that's okay.
Yeah. As I'm listening to your story, I think there's just so many pieces that are like striking me as someone who's known you for so many years, because there's a sadness for me in the sense that I think someone who knew you as a college undergrad, like from the outside, could see you as, and I think all of these things are true, by the way, that you're a very sweet, friendly person, so kind, high achieving in school, has friends, teaching assistant. So you're grading other students' assignments for 28 semesters.
Let's go for the 29th.
Sorry, I'm joking because it makes me sad that
Please, all of them.
it makes me sad to consider that, like, the hiding aspect of this is that your suffering continued untouched
Right.
because of that hiding, right? And so someone who maybe didn't know you as well or as deeply wouldn't know that you were suffering with anxiety. And at some level, it sounds like for maybe years, you didn't connect the dots between, like, when I can't breathe, that's my body telling me that I'm feeling anxious. And so maybe at some level you didn't know either,
Yeah.
to share that. But it just seems like when we hide, that means our suffering is kind of protected from being touched.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting the way that you say that, because I think my mentality, and that's another cool thing that I think about, when we talk about being able to share your story, is that we tell ourselves a lie that by keeping it to ourselves, we're keeping the people around us safe. Like, you almost put it on yourself of, no, I don't. And I'll just use this example. Like, no, I'm not going to tell my sister about my anxiety because I don't want her to worry about me. Or I'm not going to tell my mom that I'm dealing with this because she already has enough on her plate. And it's not necessarily anything that they've ever expressed to you. Like, oh, your stress is going to stress me out. Don't talk to me about it. No, it's not that. It's just, I think for me, I'm an overthinker. And so it doesn't even make sense. I'll tell myself a story that nobody's told me that. Like, why would I assume I made myself a burden to somebody else that's never expressed me as a burden? Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
for me, like I said, I'll tell myself um, that lie, I'll call it, that if I keep it to myself, I'm helping the people around me too. It's my own problem. It's nobody else's problem. I'll deal with it. I'll get over it. And it's nothing that anybody else has to worry about. And so that's again, when we talk about the weight of shame or the weight of guilt, um, when when you wrap it up in a way, we almost like defend ourselves for hiding. Like, oh, I'm doing the good thing by not telling anybody because it's just my problem, and nobody else is gonna have to worry about me, and I'm good. It's not true. The people around you, that you surround and are a part of their life, they want to see you well. And so the best thing, you don't do it for them, you do it for you. But doing it for you is beneficial for everyone around you because the way that you lead relationships, the way that you are a part of environments around you are affected with how you're doing. And again, you can do yourself, it's doing yourself a disservice. I don't know how else to express that, of not looking for help. And as far as sharing that with, friends, I had a recent conversation with one of my good college friends, and she didn't know. We were able to sit down together, and she had actually shared with me some things that she was dealing with for years, including our time in college, that I had no idea about. And that actually paved the way for me to feel comfortable enough to open up to her about what I was dealing with. And we both kind of sat there for a moment and laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was like, man, why didn't I tell you that? Like, what kept me from telling you? I was just embarrassed. Like, I didn't feel like I could share that with you. I thought you were good, I was good, and you just don't talk about that. And the same thing for me. Like, I was just embarrassed to share that. Like, and we have such a good friendship. It was almost like she's like, I didn't want to burden that with like for you, and I didn't want to be a burden for you either. But sharing, being honest with people gives people that window, gives people that door of being able to say, oh, well, if, hey, they're going through that too. I didn't know that. I go through that too. Or if, I don't know if that makes sense. But
Yeah, it does, and it creates permission, right?
yeah,
Like if someone is vulnerable, if they're transparent, then we feel like it's okay
yeah,
to be vulnerable, to be transparent, and that creates connection more than perfection does, or the appearance of being put
yeah,
together or whatever. And as you were talking about this, I was like, the thought that came to mind, Jenny, was like, independence is not a virtue.
yeah,
And what I see in your story, especially in how you have sought help and you've been open to that, like that's a humility that you have. And I think it's the humility to say, like, we need each other, right?
mhm,
Like, we need help. We're created as humans to be interdependent. And whether it's a therapist or, those loving people who came around you to encourage you to get help, like,
mhm,
that is to your credit that you had the humility to say, like, yeah, this is something I'm open to getting help for. And I don't think any of us are designed to like go it alone. I would guess, like, based on a lot of what you shared, that like you've probably been socialized and heard a lot of unconscious messages growing up about having things put together or being responsible or getting through it, not being a burden. I
yeah,
mean, I happen to know that you're an oldest child, so I don't know if that's part of it, but
yeah.
um
No, and
so,
I'm glad you brought that up and you said that, because I'm the oldest of five. And so I we grew up very close, very together. We're a big family. And so growing up, uh, I helped my parents where I could, but I also saw what it took to, we're like an army. Like, we, if you want to go anywhere, you're not packing just one bag. If you want to eat, you're just one loaf of bread is not going to cut it. We're hungry, we're tired, we're a big family. And so I'm thankful to be the older sibling, but that taught me a lot. I think of, all right, there's so much responsibility, there's so much, let me help, let me be of help, how I can be of help. And part of that mentality, I think, like you said, is growing up, I'm not going to put one more thing on your plate. And it's not ever because my parents made me feel that way. I think it's just like a first child thing, maybe, of,
Yeah.
I'll take care of myself. I'm older. You watch the babies, like take care of them. I can take care of me and my sister, or me and my brother and my sister, and we'll be good. Again, it's not necessarily something that was projected on by them, but it became a part of me of I can take care of myself. Don't worry. You don't have to worry about me. But that ultimately, like you said, it makes you independent. It can make you independent in a way that's not healthy. It's good to be able to, do things for yourself and take care of yourself. But independence is not necessarily something to be put on a pedestal and praised, especially when you need help. And so you can't necessarily always help yourself. It's okay. We were created to be in community and created to have relationship with others, and like we were talking about, hear other people's stories, not to be isolated and kept to ourselves. And I think that just opens a whole other world of connection and communication. And so while independence is a beautiful thing, it can also come back and bite you if you don't know when to ask for help, when you
Mm.
need it. So
Yeah, that's the double-edged sword of it, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, birth order is profound, and it's just something that happens in families, right? Parents don't have to say anything, and it's not parents' fault, but kids are born in a certain order, and we do tend to see across different families and even across cultures that, like,
Right.
being the oldest, for example, there are just dynamics that go along with that for the oldest child.
Yeah.
Um, and I, hearing you talk about it, Jenny, like I almost felt like, even thinking of like your army of like five kids, and um, I almost felt like in this past year, there's been a gift for you to allow yourself to be cared for.
Yeah. I think when you say, there's been space to be cared for, I think, um, like I mentioned to you, I just got good at keeping things to myself, not making my problem anybody else's problem. And um, unfortunately, later down the line, it took, situations to happen for me to realize I needed help. But admitting that I needed help was confrontational to me, in that it's like, man, no, you're supposed to be able to take care of this yourself, and look what you've done now. Again, initially the sense is you've created a problem for other people, and you
Mm.
should still be able to handle it yourself. So there, that comes as a confrontation, um, to be able to I don't really want to talk about myself. I kind of, let's talk about you. And you can't sit in a therapy session and ask your therapist, well, what was your day? Like,
Tell me more.
tell me more, right? She didn't let me do
Yeah,
that. I'm not gonna say I didn't try,
darn
but
her.
I know, right? And I was like, I'm totally okay if we use this session to tell me about your day. Kick your feet up, we'll call it. Like, we don't have to talk about me. Um, but it's it's refreshing, and it's much needed to just be able to take care of yourself. It impacts all the areas of your life, your work life, your personal life, your relational life, your life with your family. It's not selfish. To the contrary, like we talked about, getting help is not a selfish thing, because it affects all areas of your life. Um, and so for me, seeing a therapist and getting help, though it was a process to come to that realization, um, actually helped me in a lot more ways than I even initially would have thought. Because, I thought I was going in to address one thing. Um, let's, we'll call it anxiety. I thought I was going in to deal with just that, and, let's say my breathing problems. No, this addresses all the areas. How has this impacted your work? Or let's talk about how it's impacting your relationships. It's all across the board. And so again, like you said, kind of shifting to take care of yourself, you realize that you're doing the best for you and for the people around you and for the environments that you're involved in and the things and, whether it's work, um, whatever kind of activities you're involved in afterwards. And even I'll mention now that I think about it, my faith. One thing that was pretty like it clashed for me in my head was psychology and faith. And so I thought it was almost like one or the other. You can't really have two. They can't really be married.
Pick
And
one.
and so getting help actually for me, I'll mention this. It actually grew my faith. Where I had initially previously heard quite the contrary about psychology and therapy. That you could only believe in one or the other, but you couldn't believe in both. And so I say that to whoever that applies to. If you want to call it religious or you have a faith, I'd encourage you and say that it doesn't necessarily pull you away. I think it actually opens a door um, to actually strengthen your faith. So I'll
It's a
just
big
throw,
statement. Big
I'll,
statement there, Jenny.
I'll throw it in there, a little 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to say because whether it's a church or some other spiritual community that people are a part of, I do think it's very common that people would have a paradigm where it feels like a false dichotomy, right? You choose your faith or you choose psychology. These two things cannot be commingled. And um, yeah, I have a million thoughts about that. But I think, I want to say, if I try to be gracious, like, I want to say that people who would say, oh, if you're struggling, you just need to pray more, or you just need to read your Bible more. I think they're probably coming from a well intentioned place and doing the best that they know how. But, the spirit of that on the receiving end can feel like condemnation rather than compassion. And I think it's just really helpful to remember that we live in a big, wide cosmos, and regardless of what people's spiritual or religious beliefs are, is it possible that other humans have some gifts that might benefit us on our journey on this earth?
Right.
And if, for people who believe in God, it's like, is it possible that God has created certain humans with a gift for counseling or conversation? Or, I have an anxiety program where I teach all these different tools and skills for people. Is it possible that
Yeah.
maybe God has equipped some people to help us along on our healing journey?
Yeah.
And sometimes we find those people within a spiritual community, and sometimes they're outside of it. Um, so that's just a way that I tend to think about it sometimes.
Yeah. Um, I think it's a beautiful thing if you have a faith that you believe in, or like we're talking about here, if you believe in God. Um, I grew up in the church, and so from the first Sunday that I could ever possibly remember up until now, you know where to find me. I'm at church, and
I'll look you up.
I know I'll be there.
Okay.
And so I 100% agree with you when you say, people's intentions are in the right place when, if you open up to somebody, um, in the spiritual community, somebody that you trust, or, a friend that goes with you, or a counselor, mentor, whatever it is, and they gear you towards like praying more or reading your Bible more, or like a youth program, or a small group, whatever it is, that's all well intentioned. And I 100% believe that that helps. But at the same time, I agree with what you say. Like, well, what about the possibility of, the God that we say we believe in created us? And in that, he knows every single part of us and the way that we function. And very much like, doctors take care of our physical, bodies, or help us figure out what's going on. Yeah, therapists help us figure out what's going on in our minds and help us kind of put things together. And again, if this applies to you, it's okay to believe in theology and it's okay to believe in therapy. They're not two completely different worlds. And I believe that when they work hand in hand, it can really make a difference. You don't have to deny one to accept the other, or accept the other and deny the other, you know? So I think that it's great. And again, it's not ill intentioned when people steer you towards, there's nothing wrong. I think to the contrary, youth programs are great and Bible studies are great and prayer is great if you practice those things. But again, it might be also good to consider, well, therapy is also very helpful and can help in a lot of different deeper areas as well.
I think there's a specific type of transformation that happens in therapy or when you learn therapeutic tools
Mhm.
that you don't necessarily find in a spiritual community, in part because it's not the role of a spiritual community to provide um, that form of transformation, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, I agree.
Um, when I consider conversations that you and I had last year, when you were on the cusp about maybe possibly considering hypothetically going to therapy, and our conversation now, I'm like, I almost feel like a person who was very hesitant to
Yeah,
go to therapy has become a therapy super fan. That's how I'm experiencing
I
it.
know. I know. And I think you can be one of the people to testify, like, oh man, I was so hesitant. And I feel like thinking about it as you mentioned it, I think I wanted to dodge that conversation. Like when we ever had it, like, oh, I don't have time or I'm at work or I travel too much. And so I think again for myself, I feel like those were just excuses because it's still a shameful thing. It was still a shameful thing. I was still in denial. I didn't need to be a part of that. Um, and so back then it was like, oh, I don't want to touch on that. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to, I don't want to do
Yeah.
it. But now again, going through that process and um, actually experiencing therapy for myself has really been like good. I know it's funny or what is it called? It's like seeing light at the end of the tunnel. Like, okay, it's actually real. It's okay. It's better on this side. Please. So if I'm a therapy super fan, it's because I feel like I've seen the top. And I'm like, man, I want everybody to have this feeling, breathe this fresh air too. So if there's any reason, it's for that reason because I know and can recall what it was like and how it impacted me not getting the help and now having help, the like we've talked about, the transformation that it can bring about and you just feeling a whole lot better and being again for me, and we want to talk about it that way, going from feeling like I literally couldn't breathe to feeling like I can breathe in fresh air now. um as cheesy as that sounds, but
Does not
um
sound cheesy. That sounds like the difference between suffocating and being able
yeah,
to live and be alive.
yeah.
Yeah, you're speaking from the top of the mountain, right?
It's all and
So if someone's watching this and
yeah.
they, let's say, maybe they're in high school, maybe they're in college, and they've thought about the idea of getting some help, whether it be talking to a therapist or whether it be like something like my anxiety program, enrolling in that and learning tools, but they're hesitant to
Yeah.
get that type of help and access it. Sometimes it's a situation where it's like they feel coerced by a parent. Oh, my mom's making me do this.
Right.
So then I feel resistant.
Yeah.
Anyway, what would you say to someone who's like on the fence about getting help?
Well, I think um I'm putting myself in their shoes, and therapy can sound pretty scary. But like we've reiterated a few times in this video, I think it's important to know, like, there's nothing wrong with getting help. It's okay. And there's no need to wait for something to explode in order for you to look for that help. You don't need to be at the lowest point in your life. Something terrible doesn't need to happen. You can get help right here and right now. And that doesn't mean anything other than you're able to sit up and walk through a process, and it's so much more helpful than it is hurtful. And although it might feel kind of shameful and embarrassing at the beginning, give it time. And I can stand by saying that you'll see the other side and things will get much better. But it's going to be okay, and there's nothing wrong with getting help. I think that would be the word of, encouragement if somebody's on the fence about it. And with your program, I think it's awesome, and I'm sure you'd be happy and open to answering questions to students or people that, have questions about what would a program, enrolling in a program look like, or what kind of help is available for me. Whether it's a parent, kind of forcing them to do that or not. If they're just curious, I think you're a great place to start in asking questions about what kind of help is out there. If you don't know, don't be afraid to ask. There's nothing wrong with asking questions.
Thanks for sharing that encouragement for people.
Yep.
Because I do think a lot of people feel like, oh, it's not bad enough, or like they kind of self invalidate, right? Like, oh, there's people out there who are struggling so much more than I am.
Yeah,
Um, and so they feel like they're not quite to the point yet where they are someone who needs help. But people go to therapy and enroll in programs just to grow as a person,
that's right.
like just
Yeah,
like personal growth. Like there doesn't have to be anything wrong, you
yeah,
know?
that's true. And it
Um,
does it just because you got help doesn't mean you're not strong, and doesn't mean
oh, yeah.
fix things yourself. That doesn't mean anything of that sort. And I think just in general, that could be a mentality, like a more like of a negative mentality of what therapy is. Like, there's so much out there. And as far as, people's thoughts and ideas and beliefs about mental health and looking for help. But that doesn't mean you're weak. And that doesn't mean, like I said, that you can't do it alone or you don't know how to handle your own. To the contrary, I think it opens your world to so much more. And although it's not the same terminology or the same language, I've had, leaders or mentors, um, one who sings praises about the fact that he has 5 coaches. Like, he's a leader leading an organization, and whenever he has the opportunity, he talks about, like, I was not able to do this on my own. I have coaches that for different things, like for speaking, for spirituality, for reading, for like developing different qualities or like techniques. I don't do this on my own. And you open yourself to a world of knowledge, of empowerment when you look for help. And so I think that's awesome, because his ability to empower that empowers other people to say, okay, I'm going to do that too. Like, so I just hope that that comes as a help to somebody who's questioning or on the fence about it. Like, I was the girl that was not going to admit it. First of all, I was the girl that was ashamed. I was the girl that was embarrassed. Um, and for the girl out there that feels that way, or the guy that feels out there that way, go get help. And it doesn't mean you have to tell everybody that you're getting help or you're seeing a therapist or you're looking for help. But do it for you. And if you feel like that's not reason enough for you, do it for the people around you too. And I can promise you, I can promise you that you'll see the benefits of that. So that's that's that.
It's amazing encouragement. Yeah, I think for anyone who struggles with like the idea of going to therapy, caring for themselves, talking about themselves, taking up space in that way,
Yeah.
our growth as people is a gift to the people around us. And so for anyone that needs to think of it that way, like you said, Jenny, it's like even if you can't do it for yourself, like do it for the people around you. Um, because that is a gift to them
Mhm.
as
Yeah,
well.
I believe that. I believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, and I love the example of the person you talked about who has, like, did you say 5 coaches?
Yes. Yeah.
So awesome.
I can't think of, like, the different, like, what like, coaches for what,
Mhm.
because he's mentioned it more than once in, like, in his speaking. But I'm like, "Oh my goodness." He has, and I think I admire his ability to just kinda share that with people, like, "I'm telling you all right now, I don't do this by myself." Like, I see a therapist, I have a coach for speaking, I have a coach for, how to interact with people, I have a coach for leadership, and so he's open about things like that, and I feel like for me, that's been empowering, and that, again, it's like you have somebody, you know, let's call it at the top. You have somebody with influence, or somebody in a high position saying, "I don't do this on my own," and I think that just like snaps you out of the illusion of you have to have it all together, um, and opens the door for you to say, "Hey, I can get help," and even to that, in that kind of flowing in the same thought. This is a leader that told me it was okay to ask questions. And I know that's like a topic for another day. But I was in a place where, because I thought I could take care of it myself, I couldn't ask questions, because if I asked questions, that meant I didn't know how to look for the answer, or I was not, smart enough or apt enough to figure it out for myself. Because again, let's tie it back to the whole independence thing of you should be able to figure it out for yourself. And so this leader actually encouraged me, like, he told me he would be more worried if I didn't ask questions than he was worried about the questions I had to ask. So he gave me, again, that window of not only asking questions in that environment, but also asking questions for myself, like in my personal, applying that to my personal life. So anyway, I know that's been an encouragement for me, and a good reminder of, like, okay, it's normal. Like, it normalizes getting help, seeking help, and having people that are ultimately on your team too. So wanting to see you do well.
Yeah, I love that example too of, like, being encouraged to ask questions, because I think for students, whether, like, students listening to this, if you're still in school, hopefully you have teachers, mentors, tutors
Yeah.
who encourage your question asking,
Mhm.
rather than just you, feeling like you have to absorb the answers from people.
Yeah.
But I think once students graduate and they get out into the working world, they sometimes feel like they have to have all the answers. And there can be kind of a generational dynamic there where generations older than them will think they don't care if they're not asking questions.
Right.
And so
I
there can be like a huge misperception there, you know?
100%. I believe that. And again, when we talk about, generations, for me, asking questions, like I said, whether it was because of that sense of independence and sense of, like, I went to school for this, I can do it. I don't need to ask questions anymore. Um, the reason that he had shared that with me was because I wasn't asking enough questions, and we had to have a sit down. I work with this individual, and so he's great. He's my boss. And so I think that he had to call me out in that sense, because for me, my mentality was, if I ask you questions, it'll come across to you like I can't do my job and I'm not fit for it. And this is not going to work out. And you're going to start looking at other job applications because I had to ask you so many questions. So I can't do my job. And for him, my lack of asking questions actually scared him. In that he
Made
said,
him nervous.
yeah, I made him nervous because he's like, well, I was new to the job. And so he had said, like, well, why aren't you asking questions? And initially my answer was like, I don't want to bug you. Like, I just want to take care of what you tell me to take care of. Even if I didn't know, like, what necessarily was being asked of me, my mentality was like, I'm going to figure it out. I'm already in this position. You better learn how to fix it. If not, you're not qualified to be here. And so I shared that with him of my mentality about asking questions. And he cut it really quick. And he said, I need you to ask me questions because that makes me realize that we're both on the same page. And now you have two brains trying to figure something out that one was struggling really hard to figure out. Like, let's work together and let's make it happen. And we'll be more productive that way. And so for me, again, even that was letting go of a little bit of that. Like, part of my ego was like, don't ask him questions. Like, that's just a test to see if you actually, how much help do you really need? He's going to know based on how many questions you ask him. Um, so I thought it, like, again, that was just me, like a play on my mind, I felt like, but no, he was, genuine in asking, like, okay, well, please just tell me what you need, ask me all the questions, and we'll figure it out together. And that has been so much more helpful in the long run. As silly as it sounds, asking questions is helpful. And it's actually made me improve the work that I do. Like it actually helps you. And I think that we can point that back to kind of like that information intake that you were talking about. How much do you let that transform you? And so kind of like learning how to drive, you can learn the DMB book cover to cover, but you won't know until you get behind the wheel. How much do you actually apply it? And so whether we're talking about work and asking questions or life and asking questions or therapy, like, yeah, therapy sounds nice for the other guy, but that's not helpful for me. You won't know until you actually look for the help yourself. So um, there's beauty in asking questions and there's beauty in asking for help. If we had $1 for every time I said get help or ask for help, we'd make big money on that. Buy a
We should
car.
edit this video and just like put a light that lights up every time
I
we say
know.
it, hitting a
Like,
little
get help.
buzzer.
Get
Ding.
help. That's
Oh, you gave me a thought while you're saying that. Okay. We live in this like information age,
yeah.
right? And if
Yeah.
it was the case that information alone was transformative, like all of us who are on social media, consuming content, watching YouTube videos, we would all be transformed, beautiful, angelic beings by now. You know what I mean? If
Aren't
it
we?
was just about
We're pretty close.
you are, you are, but I'm a work in
Just
progress.
kidding. That's
You're
code glitch. Dear
you
Lord.
are a perfect you're a perfect angelic being. I'm a work in progress, but it's
Oh,
really it's really that we have to taste and see, right? So it's not information that's transformation, it's actually an experience.
yeah,
So like
absolutely.
that's an awesome metaphor of like the difference between reading the driver's guidebook
Yeah.
versus getting
Getting behind.
behind the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, there's some basic info you need to know by reading about it and like taking driver's ed, but like the experience of getting behind the wheel and taking that action is actually what's transformative. And the practice that you gain through that is what
Right.
makes you a driver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I I'm I agree with you. Like I said, and not particularly again for me, being a student that studied psychology, I thought I was good, but just by knowing all there was to know, um, based on the textbooks, based on lectures, I thought, again, figure it out for yourself. But it wasn't until I actually stepped in and people encouraged me, thank God, to go ahead and go through therapy about what I had planned on encouraging people, for my career to do. Maybe it's good for you to test it out yourself. And again, I say that because um, don't wait I'll say that for myself. Don't wait like I did for something to explode in order for you to get help. That's not necessary. There's so many, just for yourself, it just helps you to become a better person. Do it for that reason alone. And if you feel like that's not reason enough, just see how it affects the different areas of your life in general. So get behind that wheel.
Get behind the wheel. Just do it. Yeah, I have an operating assumption that all of us as humans are going to be growing for the rest of our lives. And therapy is one powerful vehicle, no pun intended, for that
It's
growth.
perfect.
Okay, well, I have a final question for you, Jenny. But before I ask you my final question, do you have anything else that you want to say or that you want to ask before we wrap up this conversation?
I think any final thoughts, I would like to share that while it can be difficult to start that process of, for me, like I said, there were a lot of cultural aspects, a lot of aspects that were impacted by, my religious community, or just the things I grew up with or with family. It can kind of be difficult to dismantle that if what you've heard about mental health and therapy, if you've heard about it in a negative light, it can sometimes be difficult to come to the other side of things and recognize that it's okay. Like therapy's okay. Looking for help is okay. So if there's anybody out there, college student, teens, whoever it is, high school students, I encourage you to ask questions or to look for information. And again, if it's starting with you, Dr. Park, um, be curious about mental health and how it could apply to you. Again, you don't have to wait for something extreme to happen. You don't have to wait till you get sent to the hospital because you can't breathe. Um, Being alive is valid enough. Living life is valid enough, to go and get help. So I know the first step can be challenging and it can feel scary. And even again, if you think, thankfully, if you haven't had any extreme experiences where you feel like it's ever crossed your mind to go to therapy, I would still encourage you to do so. Like if you've lived, a good life, that's great. But at the end of the day, there's never anything wrong with getting help. So that would be my encouragement. Take the first step, take the first jump. It's scary, but it is worth it. And you will thank yourself later for being willing and being courageous to go ahead and move forward. So that would be my final words. My final words.
Yeah. And that can be a life altering
Absolutely.
decision for people to seek help. And I would even say too, if you seek help and the first form of help that you encounter is not a good fit, try again. And I know how hard that is when people are in such a dark place. They feel so defeated already. And so to try to seek help the first time is hard enough. Let's say, for example, sometimes people reach out to like a mental health hotline and they're like, oh, that was so cheesy, or it's just like they told me to take a bubble bath, or like they get really superficial
Right.
advice, or they try therapy and it's like the therapist is constantly looking at their watch, or the therapist has weird shoes, or like they didn't feel comfortable with that person.
Yep.
You just have to kind of keep going through a trial and error process as
Right.
best you can until you get the help that you need.
Right.
um, I think I would say that too, and in saying that, like, I fully recognize that is so hard, when people are suffering, when they are in the throes of just like a really deep dark place, to then ask them to persist in getting help. But I think you've really shared with us, Jenny, like what it's like to be on the top of the mountain, what it's like to be on the other side is so worth it.
Yeah. It is worth it to do, you want to call it, to do the dirty work, or to keep its, and when you frame it in that way, and that's something, I'm glad you brought up, it just brings a whole other side of things. um if you've experienced a low place or a low moment and you're in the process of looking for help and they don't fit, that's like the your therapist is not, doesn't feel like a right match. It almost feels like, oh, this just makes it worse, like I don't want to keep looking for help. But that you can say, if it's getting worse, you're going to get closer to finding your perfect match. It might feel like it gets worse before it gets better, but it'll be worth it continuing to look for that right fit. And it's okay to say something if you don't match up with the right person or the right therapist, to walk through life with you. And how would you encourage students to kind of speak up even in that space, would you say? Because I feel like maybe when you're at a point of being in the room, running away is not the solution. Never going back to therapy is not a way to fix that. But how would you encourage students to continue to seek therapy, like after having gone once and feeling like it's not the right fit? How would you encourage them?
I really encourage people to think about it as goodness of fit. I think a helpful analogy can be that as a student, if you can look back on your years in school and see that you've had different teachers, some of whom were a good fit for you, some of whom were not, and everything in between. In the same way that teachers have different styles and different personalities, that's the same kind of thing for therapists. Now, therapists have a different role than teachers, of course, but if you can kind of remember that you just need to find someone who's a good fit for you, that would be my encouragement. Really, it's a goodness of fit thing. Find someone that you can trust, that you feel safe with. And I have a bias about this, Jenny, but like I do have a bias that I like um, evidence based therapy. So
Okay.
therapists who can integrate tools and skills that are based on the research. But that's an aside for now. But
That's
um,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready for the question?
I think so. The $1,000,000 question.
Yep.
Yeah.
What is something that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Ooh, there's a lot I wish I knew when I was younger. Um, but I think the main thing I wish I knew and I would actually allow to register for me would be that it's okay to not be okay. And again, we have said this time and again, if you don't you don't have to wait for an extreme situation to happen to look for help. Um, but if you feel not okay, that's okay. And that's okay to look for help, to ask the questions. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I would want to be you know, that person to tell myself, it's okay to not always have that smile on your face. It's so you don't have to pretend like everything's okay all the time. How are you doing? What's going on? So I would want to know that again with the intention of allowing it to click at a much younger age of learning how to deal with the things that I'm feeling or process different situations. Um, that's why I would tell my younger self that. I feel like it would alleviate a lot of the feelings, a lot of the situations, and hopefully just kind of give me like the ability to actually acknowledge and recognize that there's help out there. So, and we're not
Yeah.
on this boat alone. So,
We need each other, and it's okay to not be okay.
yeah.
I feel like that alleviates a lot of the guilt and the
Mhm.
shame and the embarrassment that we've talked about, that we don't have to carry that. And if anything, it's like carry less, like unburden thyself.
Yeah, exactly.
And um, instead of assuming that needing help is going to be a burden to other people, allow other people the dignity of carrying your burdens with you. That's what we do
Mm.
for each other, right?
Yeah, that's good stuff. That is good stuff.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us here, Jenny. Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for letting me share this time with you. And I just hope that it's helpful for whoever's listening.
So grateful that Jenny and I got to have this conversation. And I hope that if you're watching this as someone who does struggle with anxiety, that it's alleviated some of that sense of being a burden or not wanting other people to be worried about you. Hopefully, it's given you a sense of permission that you can let other people know that you're struggling. And of course, choose those people very carefully, very selectively. Who is it that you could let in just a little bit to let them know who's a trustworthy, safe person that you could let them know that you're struggling? And you heard Jenny and I talk about a lot of options of what it looks like to get help. I'm a fan of a blended approach to getting help for mental health. So I'm a fan of therapy. I myself do therapy a lot every week with teens and college students. And I've also taken my 20 years of experience as a therapist and created this online anxiety program to help you overcome anxiety. It's completely self paced, it's on demand. And the first step is for your parents to watch the free training that I have. And in that free training, they'll learn three keys for helping you overcome anxiety. They're also going to learn more about the program. And so that helps them discern whether it's a good fit for you or not. And then they have the opportunity to enroll you. You're also welcome to watch that training as well, of course, but just know that I'm talking to parents in the training because they tend to be the people who take that step of enrolling you. So you can find the links below in the description and in the pinned comment below. And Jenny mentioned that like you can reach out to me with any questions, and that's absolutely the case. So our email address at Through the Waters is hello at throughthewaters.org. So hello at throughthewaters.org. Feel free to reach out with any questions.